It's great to be here, and thank you for your lovely introduction. Fantastic. Brilliant. And I've got my clicker. I'm absolutely privileged and delighted to be here today for a number of reasons. It's wonderful to be at a conference that makes a connection between research and practice, one. It's wonderful to be at a conference in Europe, two. And it's wonderful to be at a conference that joins different education sectors. I've spoken to people about kindergarten, secondary school, higher education, teacher education. Really fascinating to have the whole sweep of education here today. So I'm deeply grateful for the invitation and privileged to be here today. I'm going to run through how I'll speak today, but before I do that, I just wanted to say I'm working in higher education now, but I started my career as a secondary school teacher in South Africa. So I kind of understand the translation between secondary and higher education and the need for connection and joined-upness between different education sectors. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to begin by giving you a little flip through my research on assessment and feedback. And then I'm going to look briefly at the impact of generative AI, or KI as it's known here, on education and higher education. And I'm going to do it with humility because it's an evolving picture. I don't think we have anything of a full picture yet. The research is nascent, and we need to think carefully about it as a community. I'm going to give you a bit of research from Bristol because some of my colleagues have done some research with students to find out what they think of generative AI. And I'll give you a bit of a flavor of their thinking before we launch into some practices in assessment that engage students and get you chatting about them. And I'll finish with a poem. So that's the outline of the talk. So what have I been involved in? This project called Tester, Transforming the Experience of Students Through Assessment, has been running for 15 years. Originally, we got a grant from the Higher Education Academy of £200,000. We started in 2009. It was meant to be a 3-year project, but the appetite of the sector was enormous for this project and for other projects looking at the program view of assessment. There was another one called PASS. And so in 24 actually, let me not jump ahead, it's still running, and there's still queries in my inbox and universities using it. Over 50 UK universities have used it, and other universities have drawn on it across the world in Ireland, India, Australia, and elsewhere. So what's special about it? So there are two things. The first is that it's a research project, and the second is that it's a change process. And it focuses on 3 areas. The first is to step back from individual assessments, from modular assessments, and to look at the whole program narrative from beginning to end, to look at how assessment is sequenced. And I believe there was a Scalder presentation at 11:30 that looked at sequencing. I wasn't at it, but I heard about it. So that's the first thing, the program view. The second thing is that it takes a student perspective. It's a bit of a staff planned curriculum perspective, but it mainly listens to student voices about how they experience it. And the third thing is that it's evidence-informed. And the evidence is quantitative, questionnaire, qualitative, student focus groups. We've done hundreds of them, thousands of questionnaires. And thirdly, it does a sort of planned curriculum thing, an audit of what staff think is going on, what they've written on paper and what they believe is happening. That's triangulated into a case study and presented back to program teams to begin a change process. So that is Tester. It's the thing I've been most involved in over the last 15 years. The thing that sums up the original thesis of Tester is a diagram. It's this picture of an elephant, which is my view of a modular perspective. I don't know if you want to have a quick chat to someone next to you about what do you think this says to you about teaching in modules or containers. Have a quick chat for a second. What does it say to you? Okay, I'll stop you there. We'll pick it up later. But what it often says to me, and what this picture shows in a way, is the sense that we often think in our own worlds, our own containers, and we don't know from a student perspective what's gone on before and what will happen afterwards, or what they are concurrently doing, what they're doing at the same time. And sometimes we work in these silos where our bit is magnificent, but it doesn't stitch up as a whole elephant. From a student perspective, it sometimes feels more like this, much more jumbled, disconnected, and less of a coherent whole. So that was the question we began with. What are modules doing to student learning experience? How are they affecting how students learn? Anyone who's done any research knows that the question changes. As you do more and more research, it changes. But students did corroborate our view. This is what they said initially. Have a read of these quotations. So students recognize it's not a coherent whole. They recognize inadvertently that there's repetition and that people aren't really talking to each other on program teams. The question did change, though, for me as I listened to more and facilitated more and more focus groups. And I began to recognize, particularly when I read a paper written by Sarah Mann in 2001 from Glasgow. She wrote about student alienation and engagement, and then someone from Cape Town picked it up, Jenny Case, and was writing more about alienation, a kind of sociological Marxist term about how people feel disconnected from their work, how they don't own it. And more as I listened to transcribed, thematically analyzed focus groups, I found this phenomenon of alienation at play. And what marked it was that students felt powerless. They felt overwhelmed by the amount of assessment. In modular degrees, there's more summative assessment. They measured quite a lot. They often felt passive, as though the assessment was done to them rather than with them and for them. So they lacked agency. They didn't understand the norms, the standards. They always said it's unfair. So-and-so marks like that, but this person marks like this. And so there's a hawks and doves thing where they're not clear, partly because of modularity, the sense of not knowing what the norms are. And finally, students said, the whole assessment process for them, particularly when it's hyper-theoretical, lacks meaning for them. How does it make a difference in society and to their world? Those were their questions about agency that they raised. All of this led me eventually to think, after the data and the theory stacked up, that I should get on and write a book. And over the last 5 years, I've done blood, sweat, and tears and written this book about agency and engagement. It really began in 1984 at Cape Town University, thinking about the only memorable assessment I had in 4 years of my degree. I remember loads of essays, I remember loads of exams, and there was one memorable assessment in my final year. I was training to be a teacher, and we were asked to go to KwaZulu-Natal and do a slide tape show on the Anglo-Zulu War. 4 of us, different ideological positions, different habits of mind, in a team coming up with an artifact for public consumption. In those days, it was a slide tape show. I learned more about human relations, the Anglo-Zulu War, people's political persuasions, than anything else I'd ever done. And that stuck in my mind. I don't know where the slide tape show is now. So for me, it was an example in the early days of authentic assessment. The students' evidence pushed me towards agency and engagement. My Vice-Chancellor says, when we educate people, we often think we're educating from the neck up. But actually, we need to educate the head, the hands, and the heart. This is a whole person thing. It's not just a cognitive endeavor. It's about people and their whole being. It is what Ron Barnett writes about when he writes about curriculum. He talks about education being a process of becoming. And central to the process of becoming is students making a personal connection to their learning. It's about who they are and who they become. It's not some abstract thing. Students need to make choices, exercise agency, and they need to shape the work rather than just have it done to them. The markers of agency, I'll just put up a slide just to be, it's just slightly an academic slide. These are the markers of agency and assessment. I'll let you read it. So I want to move on from thinking about my work and assessment to asking some questions about the new world we're living in, where we've got KI, AI, generative AI, like a tsunami coming into our educational world. And I know there's a spectrum of thought about it. Some people think there's just too much hype about it. And other people feel there's an existential threat to higher education and to education. So I want to just build on that by looking at what I feel the opportunities and the threats are of generative AI. And then we'll look at a bit of what Bristol's done, and then I'll get you thinking about how you prevent its misuse in the classroom. So in terms of opportunities, the first one, I think, is those of you who've had your students getting formative feedback, co-piloting, using programs to help them learn, translate. That can be quite supportive for students using some form of generative AI. I think its speed is super amazing. You know, the fact that it can pull together all of human knowledge, and let's emphasize it's human knowledge, in seconds and come up with poems and scripts and, you know, screenplays is phenomenal. It's got this big data to draw on that we have contributed to it. And I think it's a real call to us to assess differently. It questions how we've done assessment forever after and whether we need to do it differently. I think it enables students to get feedback on their work when maybe they don't want to come and knock on our door. They may want to get it privately first. They may want to just put it in a machine, get a bit of feedback, and then chat to us. So it's not a bad thing, that. And lots of the literature talks about the fact that it enables students to cognitively offload kind of grungy tasks. So instead of having to memorize and hold everything in their heads, they can offload it, so they can then get on with more sophisticated work. Are there any students in the room here? Yeah, how does this feel to you? Are you using AI like this? Not yet, okay. My students are using it, so I'm talking from that position. Okay, so what are the downsides? I think there's a huge downside in terms of when you don't have an invigilated exam, that students can use it to help them do their coursework. And you won't know the difference. You won't be able to detect it. I think the pace of it, the fact that it's just running so fast, and one of the things we put in our policy is we need to define the use of it rather than let it define our use. And because it's going so fast, it's quite hard to do that. We all know that, we've just come out of the American election. We're going through a series of elections. There's a lot of misinformation that comes out of AI. We also know that it captures up and pulls together in an algorithmic way all of the bias, prejudice, racism, sexism of humanity. I've got one of my academics who does a class on philosopher queens. She's looking at the gendered nature of philosophy. And they ask Dali for pictures and say, show me a picture of a philosopher. It's always a man. Show me a picture of a philosopher on a girl's night out. It's a man. Show me a picture of a philosopher painting their nails. It's always a man. So, there's a sense in which its algorithmic bias presses in a particular direction. There's a real digital equity question. We find at Bristol some students are paying for sophisticated versions of ChatGPT, and they are richer and get better answers that are referenced better than students who are just using what we've got on our thing, Bing Copilot. For me, the biggest worry is not cognitive offloading, but cognitive outsourcing. It's our version of a call center for knowledge, and I think the intellectual shortcuts it can enable students to take will damage their learning for life. It's a massive loss in terms of skills, intellectual capacity, writing, and writing being thinking. All of those skills and problem solving will be lost if students become over-reliant on generative AI. So that's my summary of the threats. What do students think about it? I've got a colleague who did some research at Bristol. She did focus groups with 67 students. She had a mixed bag of disciplines, mixed bag of postgraduate and undergraduate students. 62% of them were international. What did they think? What did they think the benefits were? This is what they said the benefits were. Not bad benefits. From a student perspective, what were the downsides? Quite interesting, hey? To the existential threats, students saying, well, what's the purpose of my education? Why am I doing this? What jobs will I get when I leave? How will this play out for me? And the two areas I love are this idea that, you know, I love them and hate them, the sense that somehow generative AI in its generic way is easing out creativity and criticality, and how that's the heart of what we do in higher education. What do students say about AI marking their work? This is what they say. How do they feel about it? Not very happy. So that's student impressions of the work. Students also were asked what we as institutions should do as a result of generative AI. And I'm not sure how far you are and your institutions are on this journey, but this is what they said we should do. We need to have better institutional policy and guidance. We need to quality assure that the person who wrote the thing is the person who wrote it, and it's a person. We need to focus on assessment redesign, and really that's what I want to focus on today. And we need to help students become digitally confident and capable and discerning about when to use it and when not to use it. And we need to engage in curriculum redesign to get the benefits of it, but also to ensure against some of the downsides. So what have we done at Bristol? Well, we've said we've got 4 positions. We've got 4 categories for use in assessment of AI. We've got, it's prohibited, don't use it. It's banned, and that'll usually be in an invigilated in-person exam. We've got, hey, you can use it minimally. You can use it as a spell checker. You can use it for a bit of Google Translate. You can use it for Grammarly. But don't give me chunks of text generated by generative AI. How we police that, that's a different matter. Or widen it a bit. You can use it selectively. So in this assessment, I want you to generate some material and critique it. And you can use these tools. So that's part of the assessment. Or you can use it in an integrated way, where actually generative AI is fully available to you, and you use it in a way that enables you to learn from it, and it's built into the assessment. It's the idea where you say, you've got this essay, prompt generative AI to give you 3 versions, critique them, and rewrite the essay or whatever it is in a way that's your own, and reflect on it or reflect on the process, something like that. We've also given students, this is an open source toolkit, a toolkit for how they best use generative AI. It's great, really good. Our university group really rate this toolkit. It's interactive, it's quite fun. And I'm now going to ask you just to talk in pairs again, and if you're not with a pair, join up with a pair. I had a Mentimeter here, but it wouldn't work. Just talk to one another about your ideas about how you may prevent the misuse of AI in assessment. Have a chat to one another and see if you've got any ideas on that. Are your vocational people using it? Are your people using it at all or not? Are your students using it at all?
They use it a lot.
Do they?
Yeah, but my students are grown-up people, not like the regular university students. They're like
Yeah, so they've already built up their skills. They've already built up their skills to some extent.
They simply try to get more efficient.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
Their main, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Can I just take one or two ideas? Anyone have a brilliant idea about what they would do to, or are doing to prevent its misuse or to use it well? Yes.
I make them.
I should throw you the call box.
Yeah. So I make them give me their prompts that they use. So if they just give the prompt, like, tell me something about EAPRIL, I know it's not a very intelligent prompt. So I look at what they ask and how they enriched it.
Fantastic. So it's actually helping students to ask better questions.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Because isn't inquiry-based learning just that?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Anyone else got some ideas? Yes. Oh, throw the thing.
I always ask some kind of reflection questions, and they are only personal. They just answer that question, by using their personal experience.
Fantastic. So connecting them to the learning better. Anyone else want us to throw them at them? No? Yeah, there we go.
I can't throw it very hard.
Oh.
So I will have my running exercise.
Hello, I'm a teacher of French, and I ask them, for example, when they read like a graphic novel in French, to generate an image that really captures the essence of the novel they read, and to explain in front of the others or in small groups why. So I think it makes them reflect on
Brilliant.
What is the essence.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's a bit like the philosopher queens, where they're generating images and then discussing bias in the algorithmic sense. Thanks very much. Let's move on then to some great ideas that other colleagues have done. So certainly in our guidance, some of those areas are there. So we lower the risk, and we advise our academics to lower the risk in these ways. So, another way is to say, show your workings, show your method. And often, even though AI can do podcasts, it's quite sophisticated, getting students to do public-facing outputs, blogs, vlogs, and presentations and infographics calls on their creativity in a way that they want to do themselves. It calls on their agency. You mentioned reflective writing. And I think people are also finding potentially where you've got synoptic assessments that require students to draw on a range of sources and synthesize them, sometimes can be a preventer. There's a real danger, certainly in my university, there has been a danger of retreating in some subjects into closed book exams that are invigilated. During COVID, we had a great flourishing of creativity and authentic assessment, and I think there's been a bit of a retreat in some departments to say, oh, we can't secure our assessment, and we're pushing in the opposite direction at Bristol to try and get people to think more intentionally about more authentic assessment. Okay, let's move on from generative AI to talk about how and why to design assessment that builds more agency and engagement. For me, the why is that if we want the humans in the center of this rather than the bots, we really need human agency and engagement and them owning the assessment in a way that they're proud of and get joy of to make it work for them. I want to just do this section of the talk with some examples in 3 problems I want to argue are problems in the grammar of assessment. And the first problem in the grammar of assessment is with interrogatives, with question words. And I would argue that in a lot of assessment that I see, academics focus on students answering the question what, rather than the question why or how or even who personally. And I think we see this when students say to us in focus group data from Testa across lots of universities, they say things like this. There's something about the kinds of questions we ask which isn't tapping in to the who and the why and the how, the applied knowledge, the sense of ownership. The second grammar problem, and I'll give you some examples in a second for you to interact over, but the second grammar problem I'd suggest is a preposition problem. And it's that we focus more on measuring students' learning, assessment of learning, than assessment for learning, which is the formative, playful, feedback-rich, low stakes, no stakes type of assessment where students can actually use assessment playfully for the future. When I look at the quantitative data of the audits, there's at least 5 times more summative assessment that students experience than formative assessment. There's hardly any formative assessment. And really it's what Tony Harlan speaks of. It's a pedagogy of control. It's the way of getting students to do the work. And he said it's led to an assessment arms race where there's so much summative assessment. And in a program of study, which is why you have to take a program view, if you only get one lecturer and one module laying down their assessment weapons, their proliferation of assessment, students will then divert their attention to other modules and focus a lot of their energy there. So it has to be a programmatic climb down of assessment where you agree much more formative, because otherwise it clashes, and for students there's a no-brainer if they've got a summative and a formative clashing that they'll do the thing that counts rather than the thing that doesn't count. So that's why a program view is so important. But that's one of our main problems. This is what students say about it. I think what I see often is assessment at the big hit, as a big hit at the end, without much process along the way that's iterative. And that's what the last comment refers to. But also a predominance of exams. So how do we do agency? How do we do it better? I'm going to get you answering these questions in a minute, but I'm going to show you 4 examples. And I'm going to ask you what excites you most about the example. How does it bring about better agency or stronger agency? What are the principles there? And what skills, human or digital, does the task build? So hold on to those questions, because you're going to have to work on them in a second. And I might pay you up if you're all by yourself so you can chat to someone. So the first example, this comes from a Bristol module called The Politics of Rebellion. It's a 3rd-year unit, and it's led by a guy called Chris Rosgrove, who got bored and tired with his teaching. And he decided that he would ask his students on this module to write 300-word blogs weekly and put them up on the virtual learning environment. But he said, you've done enough critical rational thinking. I want you to respond to this as a human being, from memory, from experience, and to write something more personal, more creative, rather than an analysis of a reading that I've given you. They did 10 of them with no marks throughout the term. He read them before the seminars, and he reflected them in the seminars, so they shaped the teaching. And then he asked students to select 5 of their best for their assessment. And if I were him, I would have asked them to reflect on that. Instead, he gave them an essay as well, which I thought just killed the whole idea. But, I think what he was trying to do was get student voice and excitement, and I think he leaned on over-assessment in the end, which I need to tell him. He personalized feedback for them because they'd given of themselves to him, so he personalized it and did audio feedback so they felt his connection. And when we did tester on this program, they said it was their best module. It built engagement, relationship with each other, relationship with the tutor. So that's example 1. It's from politics. Example 2, Claudia, is from biology. And I'll play you Andy Wakefield's example.
Hello, I'm Andy Wakefield from the School of Biological Sciences. A few years ago, I took over a unit entitled Conservation Biology. This unit was assessed through an end-of-year exam worth 60%, and the remaining 40% came from an essay that the students wrote as part of their continuous assessment. Now, this essay was fine. It allowed students to have a go at developing their research skills within conservation biology. But actually, I wanted to change it up a little bit and afford students greater opportunity to have a go at collaborating with one another, to develop their communication skills, to have a go at listening to each other and potentially having transformative experiences through listening to their peers' opinions, to engage in critical debate. I wanted to boost students' digital literacy. And I also wanted to actually diversify some of the assessment landscape within our school too. As a science subject, we're quite heavy on the written lab reports and the written essays already. So how does this work in practice? Well, students get given a random partner for their first formative podcast task and a topic to work on. They have a go, they have lots of fun, they make loads of mistakes, but we give them lots of feedback. And then they go off and choose a new partner and choose a new topic from a short list of titles that we give them for them to use when creating their slightly longer summative podcast. So what do the students think of it? Well, based on a couple of years worth of evaluation, both pre and post pandemic, we know that students really value these podcast tasks. And in fact, they prefer them to traditional essays, saying that they're better for building their confidence as communicators. They find them more fun and more enjoyable to work on, which in turn leads to greater motivation to work on the task itself. And they also identify that they're quite authentic in nature as well, and actually include some of those skills that they might go on to use after university.
So that's Andy. The third example is a colleague of mine called Kate. These three are all Bristol examples. I'll give you a Canadian one in a second. And she teaches on a stem cell and regeneration unit. And what she asks her student to do formatively, her students, is to do 3 things on a template, and it's a grant proposal, an impact analysis, and a communications portfolio. They're short, they're a brief version of the full thing, and students get peer and tutor feedback on this. On the basis of their experience of trying out 3 different ways of demonstrating their learning, they choose one, which then becomes their 100% summative. I find it quite an elegant method. It's, you've got 3 formatively that you can choose, and then the final one you choose. So you exercise agency. What did you enjoy doing most? What did your feedback point you in the direction of doing well or not so well that you want to do better at? And you choose that one. So that's the third one. The final one comes from Canada. I don't know if you guys do exams, but this is called the 2-stage exam. And I'll play it for you now.
So the 2-stage exam is a very simple process. You do an exam just like normal, an individual exam. Students hand that exam in, and then you immediately get them into groups of 4, and you have them do the exact same exam again.
Once you have your group of 4, stay seated and raise your hands. One of our TAs or instructors will give you a group exam, and then you may start.
You only give them one piece of paper, though. They have to agree on the answers. So they basically teach each other what they got wrong. It's very interesting and exciting to see students arguing about your topic with enthusiasm, and there's high fives and swearing, and it's very interesting. They're very happy when they get it right, and they're upset when they get it wrong, but it's good for them to know right away.
I think for me, the wonderful thing about 2-stage exams is it's almost like a second chance. There's a first portion where we get to test what we've learned and how we've studied, and a second portion where we get to go over some of our answers with classmates, so we get different sides of learning. I definitely feel like I learn more and I remember more.
We've done research that shows that student retention is better when they do the exams in this format. So they correct themselves immediately what they got wrong, and then they retain that information better. I don't ever want to do an exam another way because it's so exciting and interesting to see students really engaging with your material. A colleague of mine in life sciences had a TA that burst into tears when she saw a 2-stage exam because they're talking about biology. So it's very exciting to see as an instructor.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I love about that is the move from group to individual, the move from written to spoken, and that students are teaching each other. It seems to capitalize on what you see after an exam where students leave the exam hall and a few of them with friends will chat to one another and say, what did you put? What did you... And other people will go home lonely and weep into their tea. So there's a sense in which it does it as a group endeavor, which is really amazing. Yes?
Just curious, then what grade?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What you can do in the grading is you tell students before how you'll weight it, and you might do 60-40, 50-50, 70-30. What you need to do is, a lot of my staff have started doing it, and they'll do it formatively first to try it out, so they'll see how it works like that. Some of them are doing it summatively, and they're not calling it a 2-stage exam, they're calling it a 2-stage assessment. But you have to do it in the same time period because that's the energy. But the thing that I'm tripping up against is where students have got alternative exam arrangements, where they've got well-being questions. And so we're working with our teams that do disability services to see how we can manage that, because some of our students have got anxiety about group work and whatever, so we're trying to work that piece in. But, at least 4 or 5 of my colleagues in departments have adopted this, and in previous universities they've done it. It's taking off a bit, and I think it's just brilliant. But anyway, that's my view. I'm going to move us on and get you, and I might get Alfred with Alexander, because they seem to be lone wolves, you know, talking to each other about those 4 ideas. Let me remind you, the blogging on the politics of rebellion, where I want to error correct the lecturer. And the second one was the podcast on biological sciences. The third one was the elegant stem cell with the 3 tasks and then the summative, and then the 2-stage assessment. I'll give you 5 minutes to chat about it. Exercise. So what I want to suggest to you is first of all, I want to say to you, all of the literature says, and my book says this too, that we need to move away from feedback as telling. It doesn't work. It's like water off a duck's back. This is what students say. And we need to move away from feedback as telling to feedback which is about a relationship with our students. And the best way and the best metaphor for understanding this is to see feedback as a gift-giving ritual, a relationship of gift-giving. Now, my students and other students, when they hand in their work, they do it on a digital platform, and when on a Sunday or a Friday night they submit their essay to me, they have been working on it for weeks, or their project. It's their gift to me. Now, some of the students might have picked up their gift for me at the late night services on a Friday night, but a lot of them will have been preparing it, crafting it carefully, and they press the submit button, and on the other end of it, I get 120 gifts all at once. And it feels like that kind of Christmas where someone's given me a whole lot of socks and handkerchiefs. And maybe there's one orange poncho in there. But the rest of them feel like so bland. And that's part of the assessment design too, because often we go for standardization rather than enabling students to express their choice and creativity. I've got a wonderful, sorry, I have to go off track, I've got a wonderful economics lecturer who's bored with her own marking and assessment, and she said to her second-year class, a global class, I'm going to teach you the methodology, I'm going to teach you the ideas and the philosophy of this, and then I want you to go and choose the area, topic, the place of your study or research proposal into using these methods. So students from a global classroom went everywhere, and she got 120 different pieces. She took a tad longer to mark, but at the same time she said she was never bored, because she had, you know, analysis of economic indicators in China. She had, you know, it was just so different, and that was about students having some choice. She also had a phase looking at the research proposal. So how do we make feedback more of a relationship? Well, I'm going to say to you, we reply to the gift quickly. So, you know, we try and send the thank you letter, not 3, 4, 5 weeks later. 4 or 5 weeks, we've got a 3-week policy, but we try and reply quickly, and we reply in a way that, even if it's anonymous marking, recognizes the person. There's a great guy called John Bean who writes about academic writing and marking and critical thinking, and he says when we mark in the marginalia, in the margins, sometimes we put those sort of phatic symbols like question mark, exclamation mark. It means nothing to students. What we should say, rather, is something that is tonally conversational. Whoa, I'm not getting you here. Where is this going? Or, ooh, exciting idea. Have you read? So almost putting in more questions that trigger reflection for students, rather than just telling students what we think and what they should do. So that's I think we need to shift our feedback to be more about a conversational question in its tone. I'm moving on now to what I love as a piece of dialogic feedback, which does both the AI proofing and the conversation. I've got a colleague called Rachel Flecker in geography, and what she does is live marking. It's like a mini Viva, and so she gives students 20-minute slots on Teams. She's got a work allocation that is 20 minutes to mark every piece. They've got a short technical report that she has to mark, and she invites them for 20 minutes, and students then have a conversation with her where she can say to them, "Hey, John, that's a really interesting paragraph, but I don't quite understand what you mean by that. Can you just explain to me or give me an example of what you mean in concrete terms?" So the conversation is back and forth where students can then show that they understand the concepts and the contents rather than, and she doesn't prepare beforehand. She's got, and I've mentioned a sort of way of framing it beforehand, because you need to work with students beforehand to get it right. And you in your head need to go in reasonably confidently with a method for marking in this way if you haven't read the scripts, and it can't be too long a script. Economy of style is not a bad thing, not giving 10, 20,000 word pieces. For quality assurance, she records the conversation and then she does a 1-minute recording for the external examiner, because that's a thing in the UK. So that's live marking using human means of dialogue. I'll give you one more example of an interesting way Queen's University Belfast, where you were last year as EAPRIL, use AI to augment human feedback and what they've done. I mean, that's an amazing thing. So in psychology, they've co-designed with 112 students a way of marking where AI augments the feedback. So what the tutors do is it's an experiment, and I think they've written some feedback, and they ask AI to give it a tonal quality which is more encouraging and more speaks to students. So they've done this experiment. I've put the paper in the references. They did it partly to improve students' experience of feedback and partly to ease staff workload. I'm not sure it's ease staff workload. And it's formative. But what happens when compared with the real thing, the vast majority of students preferred the AI-generated feedback because of its tone. And only those bruiser students who don't need ego brushing or compassion or empathy preferred the straight talking of their tutors. Their Pro-Vice-Chancellor says this about it. Isn't that interesting? AI feedback making a more human, empathetic, tonal quality. Fascinating, surprising. But we can do that, or, and I'm being playful here, we can do feedback which is more humanly crafted, idiosyncratic, and quirky. And so, I'm going to read you or this type of feedback. I'm not suggesting you do it, but it's quite fun. And this piece of feedback shows that feedback is a human interaction. It's the gift relationship. It's an I-thou relationship. It's a head and heart thing. It's a conversation. So let me read you from this wonderful book called How Higher Education Feels. It's a book of poems. A poem called Weekend Plans. In a talk I recently heard, the speaker said that at 50, a man has less than 1,500 weekends left in his life. Having chewed on this fact for the last week, I now realize that my 1,499th weekend is coming up. And so I'm making big plans. On this 1,499th remaining Saturday, I plan to grade a stack of student papers. But knowing that there are only so many more of these Saturdays to sit through, I am planning on writing the most remarkable comments and grades I have ever composed. Instead of pointing out where the prose clunks, I will say that the sentence over which I stumble reminds me of a 1962 Fiat convertible I once owned, a car that ran well enough when I bought it, until I rear-ended a truck one day and the front end crumbled, pushing the radiator back just enough that the fan chewed a hole through the back end, the blades not only making an unearthly racket, but also bleeding the radiator dry and leaving a green stain on the pavement. And instead of pointing out that a comma is not a coma, and no one and a lot are two words, that a manor is a large country house, in a manner of speaking, and that collage is not an institution of higher learning, I will point out to them that Shakespeare too invented new spellings and words, so that rather than see their grades as a kind of condemnation, they might rather embrace these marks as a sort of celebration of their wild and anarchic spirit, which has emancipated itself from all bounds, from all pedestrian, prosaic concerns on this glorious remaining 1499th Saturday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your presentation. We have a small gift for you.
Oh, thank you.
So you can catch your breath, because maybe there are some questions.
Fantastic.
If there are questions, please raise your hand. Yeah.
Catch box to the back.
Catch box to the back. Yeah, here it is.
Exercise.
Where is the...
Right at the back, the gentleman on the right. Our right. Ba-dum!
Is it working?
Perfect.
Can you share us the URL of the YouTube video of the double phase exam?
Of course I can. What I'll do is I might send to the EAPRIL team, I'll send the slides, but there's quite a lot of kilobytes in them. So what I might do is I'll send the videos separately as well, so you can share them. But I'll send the slides maybe as a PDF, because it's much better, which reminds me of the student who left's question, or she said to me, effectively, she didn't say it like this, don't I care about sustainability in terms of generative AI? Yes, we do, and it's the first thing, if you look at the guidance, it's the first thing we say is it's carbon intensive and it's not sustainable. So my presentation is not that sustainable, so I'll send a PDF and that. Yeah, there's a question here.
Do you also write about peer assessment in your book?
I write a little bit, but you know the best person on peer assessment is David Nichols. David Nichols, he's retired now, but he's written a number of really good pieces on peer assessment. And the nub of what he says is that the person who learns most from peer assessment is the giver of the feedback rather than the getter. I've got my staff say, oh, my students don't want to do it. They feel embarrassed, ashamed, nervous. They feel like we're the experts. Why should they do it? I gave a talk in Dublin a few years ago, and someone said, yeah, we found this. Students don't really want to do peer feedback. And it's about the emotions of giving peer feedback. And so what he did was he asked them to write down, maybe on some digital platform, doesn't really matter. He asked them to write down 3 adjectives about how they feel about giving peer feedback. And they said nervous, anxious, blah, 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 inexpert, or whatever they felt. How they feel about getting it, and they put those adjectives down. And then he said, now I want you to do it. And they did it in class formatively, so no marks. And then he said, let's do the adjectives again. And what it showed was there's quite a lot of anxiety about it, But when you get over it and do it, students learn a lot from it and love it. So that's the, and Graham Gibbs, who was my mentor, he said they started with, giving students anonymous examples to mock mark with criteria, and that's a way of them getting habituated to developing that evaluative judgment, which they need to do. So I haven't written a lot about it, but I have got a chapter in the book, chapter 7, which is about internalizing standards, and one of the ways you do that is through peer feedback. Thanks for the question, though. Cool.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Jeroen, and
sometimes assessment is a weapon or a tool for the teacher where they can push the students to study a little bit more. When we think about what we are talking about, what we are doing with these, we are taking off this weapon or tool to the teacher, or we are trying to replace or give them another way to do it. What do you think about?
It's really interesting, the weapon or tool. It reminds me of what I said about the assessment arms race and assessment being a pedagogy of control that is in our toolbox as teachers, because it's a way of us, when there are lots of competing agendas. For students, the big competing agenda in the UK is that they do part-time work, and therefore they just have to spare the amount for the summative, because actually they could either be working in the supermarket or the bar earning money or doing the formative. I would say one way we can, and look, we've had, I don't know if you guys have had, we've had a massive challenge with re-engaging students in in-person learning post-COVID. But one of the ways traditionally I would have said is that do some of the formative work in class. I think you said it, Claudia, that when you've got a large class, creating space for students to do some of the problem-solving thinking work is a good way of, and some of the peer feedback, rather than doing it as homework, but doing some of it then. But I agree with you, it's one of the levers we have to get students to do work. And it's, for me, why is assessment so important? If we believe that learning is probably more important than teaching, then actually the learning happens when we have really well-designed assessments that students do the work on. I think often we're doing too much of the work and students aren't doing enough of the work. But it's about capturing enough of their attention to do some work which is a proxy for understanding, rather than them having to do everything and the kitchen sink. Sometimes we do too much assessment. So I don't know if that's answered your question. I don't know if you were asking about AI as well in terms of the substitute. I wasn't sure. No. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time probably for one more.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about our teacher education. We work with assessment as learning, and students may choose how they prove what they have learned. So mostly written documents. But in the meantime, we think that about 70% of the portfolios are filled with ChatGPT. So we should rethink about the whole portfolio assessment. Do you have some advice for us?
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of the portfolio assessment, we often think it's a better way of engaging students in doing the work themselves if it's brief enough and in class sometimes and gets feedback quickly. So I was with my mathematicians last week, and they were saying this year they've given feedback within 7 days for problem sheets. So students do it and then they get feedback quickly. And normally this time of year they've stopped doing the formative problem sheets, but 80% are doing them because they're motivated by the feedback. I think there's something around, it's really challenging the written assessment. I think part of it is your answer. Make it personal, make it reflect on their own experience. Look, ChatGPT can mimic that, but kind of making it so you've got some interaction with them. I don't know how big your classes are about it, or you get them to exemplify in snippets, so I love the 3-minute thesis or the 1-minute thing. So you get them to do a bit of the portfolio, and then you say to them in class beforehand, you say, I'm going to ask 5 of you to stand up randomly to tell us what your reflection was about. So you get more of a sense of accountability for that from students is a good way of doing it. I think is sort of just bringing to the fore the ownership. But I think mixing it up as Andy does so that they've got to represent and reflect their knowledge in different ways is another way. But I think it's a massive challenge for teachers, to be honest. There's no silver bullet. Fab, done.
Thank you, everybody. I think final round of applause, please, for Tansy Jessop.